Everybody, welcome back. This is Reds Minor Leagues Talk. I'm Doug Gray. He's Kourage and Doug. Big day today. The Cincinnati Reds had to protect as many players as they possibly could from the upcoming Rule 5 draft, which will be at the end of the winter meetings in December. Today is the last day to protect anyone. They've technically got until 5 p.m. today, but it seems that they've made their moves, although the Reds have not confirmed them. We've seen the rumors come out. Here's the list of the guys they did protect. There were 7 in total. They started off, this is going to be in alphabetical order, by the way. Outfielder Aristides Aquino, right-handed pitcher Barrett Aston, outfielder Phillip Ervin, right-handed pitcher Kiri Mayo, right-handed pitcher Jackson Stevens, right-handed pitcher Nick Travieso, and outfielder Jesse Winker. Now, 2 of those guys, Kourage, I think that everybody felt they were absolute locks to be protected, with Jesse Winker, who's one of the top hitting prospects the Reds have had for the last 4 years, and then Aristides Aquino, who won the Florida State League MVP this year. Just impressive power display. Led the league in extra base hits, led the league in triples. He was second in home runs and had 26 doubles. And then of course he had an insane 28 outfield assists. I feel that everybody was very confident that those 2 were absolutely going to be protected. After that, I think there was the next tier of guys that were very likely to be protected, but I guess if you really wanted to argue it, you could make an argument that maybe some of these guys weren't. The 2 guys that I feel were very comfortably going to be protected were 2 guys that you saw a lot in Pensacola this year. Phillip Ervin, definitely one of those guys, and then Nick Travieso was the other guy I felt was probably going to be protected. Both of those guys were first rounders in 2012 and 2013. What are some of the things that you saw from those guys this season?
Well, the thing to remember with Phillip Ervin, which is just something we'll have to accept as he moves forward and hope to see improvement on, is he didn't hit for average, a 239 clip in Pensacola, but still finished the year in the top 10 in the Southern League in OPS, on base percentage, slugging percentage, walks, and stolen bases. This is a guy who can put together productive at-bats. It just doesn't reflect in his batting average. And looks to be, even though the Reds try him out in center field every now and again for Pensacola, a reliable left or right fielder, or at the very worst, a fourth outfielder. And as far as the Rule 5 pick, this is someone that if you lose, you don't want to lose the potential of a guy like Phillip Ervin, who can give you some results at the plate.
Yeah, I think with Ervin, the one thing that I've always said with him is that I think that right now, he projects to be a 4th outfielder tomorrow if a team needs him to be. Like you said, the average might not be there, but every other part of his game is there. And so as a 4th outfielder, you could definitely put him on your roster next year, even without that AAA experience, and hope that, he can continue to develop and then one day turn into a starting, outfielder. And then there was Nick Travieso, who he had a bit of a down year this year compared to what he's done in the past. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that he went through during the season?
Well, I don't really think I saw him at his best all year. He had a few health scares, a bit of an incident in Jacksonville trying to cover first base where he missed a few starts. But the little we did see in the second half, at the back end of that Wahoo's rotation, he was a much improved pitcher. First half stats, pitched to a 4.91 ERA in 62 and a third innings, trimmed that to 2.62 in 55 innings in the second half. And as far as intangibles, he's a great guy. He's a competitor and studies the game in depth, as do all those double-A pitchers, the Rookie Davises, the Amir Garretts, and so on. But it's just a matter of fastball command. He would lose the zone a few times. I saw a 7-walk performance out in Mobile that was hard to watch, but he took his advice well from Danny Darwin, put in a lot of focus on his side sessions, and I can still see that first-round potential in Nick Travieso. And clearly, with the addition of the Reds' 40-man roster today, so does Cincinnati.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned the fastball command. With Travieso, that's kind of been the thing that I've always said about him, is that what really made him stand out among all of the other Reds pitchers in the system is that before this year, he had always been able to command that fastball very well. He could put it where he wanted to, when he wanted to, and that kind of gave him a big edge over a lot of the other guys. In the first half, he really struggled with his fastball command, and you saw that. He gave up 9 home runs in the first half. He only gave up 2 in the second half as his control really improved down the stretch. You mentioned that he had a couple injury issues he missed several starts 3 different times, but never really missed. I think he missed 3 weeks at the most at one point. The stuff wasn't quite as crisp as it was in the past from what I saw, but like you said, he had those injuries, so that probably played into it a little bit. Definitely a protect for me. I think that somebody would definitely take a chance on him if they didn't protect him. I mean, at this point last year, he was dominating the Arizona Fall League and averaging over 95 miles an hour with his fastball. That's definitely an arm somebody probably would have taken. So it was a good choice to protect him from the Reds' point of view. Now we'll move on to a few other guys. 2 other pitchers that you probably saw in Pensacola. Barrett Aston, who was a reliever. He's actually just finished his season in the Arizona Fall League. And then Jackson Stevens, who's a starter, also performed very well for Pensacola.
Yeah, we'll start with Barrett Aston, who, credit to him for really following Pat Kelly, the manager's instructions, whether they needed him as a starter or reliever. He was able to go out there and provide quality innings, and performed about as well in both roles, which really surprised me. 3.3 record, 241 earned run average as a starter, and improved as a reliever down to 209 in almost as many innings, produced a whip under 1, and went out and, with the exception of his last start, which I think you can take the pressure off in your final game of the year, over 100, almost 200 games under his belt from start to finish, put together a very solid, if not spectacular, Fall League campaign. But low to mid-90s, he's been a good bridge guy, and moving forward now on the 40-man roster, the Reds can find a spot for him.
Yeah, his numbers were kind of so-so if you want to look at things in the Arizona Fall League. Now, granted, it's been a long season, and unlike most guys that were out there, he did have a bigger workload. Not too many starting pitchers that had a full season go out to the Arizona Fall League anymore, because teams get a little weary about their innings limits and everything. And Aston was just over 100 innings this year because he did kind of go back and forth between the starter and reliever role. But I'm looking at his numbers right now from the StatCast stuff that they have out in the Arizona Fall League, and he averaged 95 miles an hour with his fastball. That's a pretty good arm. I mean, he topped out at 97. That's pretty good for a guy who generally is more known for his control than his stuff. So you give a guy like that, a chance in spring training for $50,000 if he goes unprotected. He probably could stick. A guy that throws strikes with that kind of fastball, they could probably find a way to use him once or twice a week. So I think the Reds definitely made the right move to protect him there. And then jumping on to Jackson Stevens, I mean, he's 22 years old and he had big success in Double-A. I really like him. I'm not entirely sure if his future role is going to be as a starter or reliever, more so because of the depth that the Reds have in the starting rotation in the upper minor leagues and the major leagues right now. So where he winds up in the future for the Reds, I'm unsure. But he's another one of those guys where I think that a team could definitely put him on their roster if they chose to. Even next year, maybe he could be one of those swingman, long reliever type guys next year if the Reds left him unprotected.
Yeah, Jackson Stevens, he's kind of, and I don't like player comps too much, so I'll give you an actor comp. Okay. Kind of reminds me of Kevin James, not by body type at all.
Well, I was going to say, you might need some glasses if it were by body type, because Jackson Stevens he's in quite a bit better shape than Kevin James is.
That's true. But here's what I'm getting at. Kevin James gets consistent work. Remember, I think he was in prime time on NBC for some time, but he's the least sexy pitching prospect in the Red system. Great results. I just don't know if he's a leading man. So to take that analogy to baseball, here's a very fringy starter, but certainly a reliever that ideally blends into your bullpen. You'll win a few, you'll lose a few, but you'll put zeros on the board, and that's what Jackson Stevens was able to do for Pensacola all season long in his Double-A debut.
Now, the last guy that we haven't talked about yet is right-handed Kiri Mayo. He came over last year from the Giants. Surprisingly, heading into spring training, it seemed that everybody figured that he was going to be in the Double-A rotation, including the Double-A manager who mentioned him halfway through spring training on the radio in Pensacola. Turns out that didn't happen. He actually spent the whole season down in Daytona pitching for the Tortugas. Where, I'm not going to lie, he had some struggles, especially early in the season. He really had problems getting through the first inning. He really calmed down after that, but it just seemed that almost every outing he would struggle to throw strikes in the first inning, and he'd give up plenty of runs, and then after that he'd calm down. I know at one point, I think it was in June, his ERA in the first inning was over 11, and then every inning after that it was under 2.5. He really just couldn't get going, and then once he did, everything was fine. His strikeout rate was down and his walk rate was up this year. I mean, those generally aren't good things to see, but the stuff was still there. He's still pitching in the mid-90s, very good slider. The Reds probably would have liked to have seen better results from him, but with that kind of arm, he probably would have gotten taken at some point in the Rule 5 draft if they didn't protect him. A team probably could have put him in the bullpen and used him once or twice a week, similar to like I had said with Aston and Stevens. Finding somewhere to use him maybe as a long man kind of guy, sixth inning type, just to get that kind of arm in their system for a relatively cheap price.
And this is a guy that we forget. We talk about Adam Duvall in the Mike Leake trade. Well, when Mayo came over, he was, by MLB.com standards, the top Giants prospect. And obviously the double dip in Daytona wasn't ideal, but did make the spot start in Louisville at the end of the year, and should be interesting of that group. Mayo, Travieso, and Stevens. With the pitching prospects the Reds have, someone's going to be left behind in Pensacola. And granted, there are worse places to be left behind. But,
that's for sure.
Well, that's going to be an interesting question going into spring, which is not too far away. February 13, I believe, pitchers and catchers report. But moving forward, after Major League camp breaks and after these players are moved, Pensacola should have their hands full again with pitching prospects.
Yeah. Now, we can jump into a few names that maybe surprised us that weren't of the players protected. I know two really stand out to me more than any of the others, both pitchers. The first guy is Zach Weiss, who did not pitch at all this season. Coming into the year, he was my top-ranked relief prospect in the Reds organization. He had some elbow issues in spring training, and they weren't thought to be serious. When I talked to him in spring training, he had told me that he was only going to start the season a few weeks later than he had planned. Basically, I read into it, he was going to be back by the end of April. That didn't work out. He never really felt quite right throughout the season. He didn't need surgery. The Reds feel fairly confident that he'll be ready for next season. But he did not pitch at all this year. Even so, when he's been healthy, he's absolutely dominated the minor leagues. In 2015, he blew through the Southern League like he didn't belong there. And realistically, he probably didn't belong there. He definitely did enough to earn a promotion at some point during the season, but the Reds kept him there to help, push Pensacola into the playoffs. Definitely a guy that I would have protected over, not necessarily over anyone that they did protect, but looking at their 40-man roster, I feel that he's more valuable to the Reds than some of the guys that are still on the roster. It wouldn't surprise me if someone took a chance on him, although I understand the Reds not protecting him also, given that he didn't pitch. Maybe other teams aren't as aware of his health situation as the Reds are, and so that'll give them, maybe the idea that maybe they shouldn't select him, although stranger things have definitely happened. I mean, when he's been healthy, the stuff has definitely been there. Not quite closer material, but definitely 7th, 8th inning guy when you look at the raw stuff. And then the results have been off the charts since he was drafted. The other guy was left-handed pitcher Ismael Guillon. Now, he's been on the Reds' 40-man roster before. He missed all of 2015 with a torn muscle in his back. He came back this year and absolutely dominated in Daytona. When I saw him down there this year, he actually was starting. He made several spot starts in a role very similar to Barrett Aston, who we talked about earlier. Kind of moved back and forth. I think he made 10 or 11 starts for Daytona and 20-something relief appearances. But, I mean, he was unhittable. He had 10 strikeouts in 5 shutout innings. Just showing absolutely filthy stuff with the fastball and changeup. I mean, the opponents had no chance whatsoever against him. I'd be really surprised if a team doesn't take a chance on him. He's got big stuff from the left side, and while he's only been in high A as far as the most advanced level he's been at, left-handers with that stuff don't grow on trees. And you can definitely hide a left-hander like that in your bullpen if you need to. Those were the two guys that jumped out for me. Did anybody stand out for you that the Reds didn't protect, that maybe you thought they would lean towards taking?
I don't think... I think I saw the Reds leaning toward them, but I didn't think they'd make this 40-man roster either. two Arizona Fall League standouts who had seasons prior to going out to the desert that were respectable in their own right. Zach Vinci vying for the AFL MVP award, even with an 0-for-5 performance in the finale. Gold Glove shortstop at a premium position, no less, and hit with a little more aggression in the second half. Really boosted his numbers. And then Brandon Dixon, who is mostly positionless, but we know he can hit. He put on a 10-day one-man home run derby in Pensacola before a major skid, but he made the adjustments in the second half, took that to the Fall League, and hit over 300. And yeah, these are the sort of players. It may be a little harder to put a position player on that 25-man roster, which is what the Rule 5 draft stipulates. Otherwise, they'll return to the organization. So we'll see if Dixon or Vinci is appealing to another team, especially the defense that Vinci provides and the potential in Dixon's bat for a little bit of power. But at the end of the day, I'm not surprised they're left off with all the talent ahead of them.
Yeah, I think you summed that up pretty well. Either one of those guys, if I try really hard in the very most perfect situation, I could see a team selecting them. But I think the Reds probably made the right move, leaving both of those guys off at this point. Both guys had very good, successful seasons in Arizona. But when you really think about it, neither one of them even played 20 games. So, does that really change the perception of how the players are viewed? Probably not. A few scouts may have gotten an extra look at them in that time, given how it's a very heavily scouted league. But I don't think that we saw a massive skills change between either of those players. So I doubt the evaluations from other organizations really changed too much on either of those players. One other guy that I'd actually like to mention is super wild card, and I don't blame the Reds at all for not protecting him, but is Jonathan Crawford. He's been injured pretty much ever since he got to the Reds organization. He came over in the Alfredo Simon trade with Eugenio Suarez. And at the time, he was one of the top prospects in the Tigers organization, top 100 prospect in all of baseball. The guy hasn't been able to stay healthy. Now, before the trade, he was a guy who was 93 to 95 with an outstandingly impressive sinking fastball. I saw him come through Dayton in, I want to say it was 2012, but it may have been 2013. And, I had seen very few fastballs that moved like that. And usually it was from guys that were throwing 89 to 91, not 93 to 95. And then he mixed in a plus slider. I think that a team that has been high on him for quite a while, if they saw him in his last few outings when he was with Daytona, rather than the first few outings when he was with Daytona, that a team could take a chance on him. Maybe just to get a look-see in spring training for $50,000. If he can show the kind of stuff that he showed before he was injured, that's a guy that you can put in the bullpen right now. That fastball and slider will absolutely play, assuming he can throw enough strikes. He definitely picked up velocity in his last few starts with Daytona versus his first few starts, where he was literally, 86 to 89 with his fastball those first few starts. He added 5 to 6 miles an hour over the last few starts. So it was very nice to see from the Reds' perspective and, of course, from his own perspective that he was building that back up and getting back to where he was. So if a team has gotten a good look at him those last few starts, it really wouldn't surprise me if somebody took a gamble on him, assuming they've got the roster space for it. Also, we mentioned at the very beginning that we had just seen the rumors of the list that came out. The Reds actually just confirmed it 2 minutes ago. All of those names were the correct ones, so good thing we don't have to record this again. We totally got it right. So
one take. Did it in one take.
It's my favorite kind because I feel like we spent about 12 minutes now doing this, and we'd had to start all over again. But that's all we've got for today. Hopefully we'll be back real soon. We kind of pushed things off a little bit, waiting for this announcement to happen. So sorry for being gone for a little bit longer than we had planned, but I think it worked out well, and we will definitely see how this works out as far as who the Reds may lose in the Rule 5 draft. I think that they will avoid picking someone. They can still drop someone from the 40-man roster if they do see someone out there that they would like to take, and they'll get to go second overall based on their record from last year. But I think that they will avoid taking someone. But it wouldn't be the craziest thing. No one saw anybody taking Josh Hamilton in 2007, and it worked out pretty well for the Reds. So I guess you never know. But I think the odds are far more great that the Reds will lose someone, or maybe multiple someones, than to see them pick someone. But,
and it's a slippery slope, because we remember Jake Cave last year with the Yankees was competitive in that outfield in Goodyear for a while, returned to the New York organization and didn't make that roster either, spent his time up at AAA for most of the year. So even if the Reds do have a casualty of the Rule 5 draft, check back in April. We never know what could happen. And fortunately for the Reds, the one name that did stick from that draft class, Ariel Hernandez, is joining the others a little earlier. He's already on that roster. We'll see what the Red system looks like after this draft. Plenty of other good depth, Chad Wallachs, Nick Routs of the world up for grabs in just a few weeks.
All right, well, everybody, thanks for listening. If you like what you see, please subscribe to the channel. Check out our work at redsminorleagues.com. Our Twitter handles are below. Be sure to follow us there. And until next time, see you guys.